Hello and welcome. Something moves high above the mortal world tonight, beyond the reach of storms and the tallest mountains. It catches no wind because it does not need the wind. It does not fly because muscles carry it upward. It flies because it was born of a higher purpose, because the fabric of divinity itself wove its wings into being before mortals had names for the stars. You cannot see it from where you are, but if you were to stand in the right place, at the right moment, you might catch a single feather drifting down through the celestial air, glowing faintly with a light that has no source, warm and soft, and ancient beyond all counting. Section 1. Wings of the Upper Planes. This is a video about celestial birds, not monsters with feathers you fight or flee from, though some of them carry enough power to shake the foundations of cities and bring walls of stone down to dust. These are beings whose very existence is an act of devotion. Their wings are prayers made physical. Their voices, when they have them, carry the resonance of the upper planes, of Mount Celestia, and the golden fields of Elysium, and the soft green hills of Bytopia. And their silence, when they are silent, carries something even heavier than sound. The weight of divine while moving quietly through the world, doing what needs to be done without asking for recognition. To understand them fully, you have to start somewhere close to the beginning. In the cosmology of Dungeons and Dragons, reality is arranged in a vast structure called the Great Wheel. Different planes of existence surround a central hub, each one a reflection of a fundamental philosophical truth. The 9 hells of Badr represent law twisted into cruelty. The abyss represents chaos blooming into malice. The celestial planes, the upper planes, represent what happens when goodness is given a geography, when mercy and beauty and courage and wildness are allowed to expand into infinite living space. Each of these realms has its own texture, its own light, its own particular flavor of sacred feeling. And all of them, every last one, have birds. The good-aligned outer planes, the ones most commonly called the upper planes, are a family of realms that share the essential quality of goodness, while each expressing it differently. You have Mount Celestia, the most perfectly ordered of them all, a mountain so tall it pierces through 7 distinct layers of the cosmos. You have Bytopia, with its 2 mirrored layers, facing each other across an open sky, a realm of honest labor and self-reliance. You have Elysium, which is perhaps the most purely compassionate of all the planes, a place so kind and so restful that it almost aches, where the souls of the good-hearted come to finally breathe. You have the Beastlands, where nature reaches its most sacred and unrestricted expression, where animals walk with the dignity of gods. You have Arborea, wild and passionate, and fierce in the way that love at its most honest is fierce. You have Usgard, where heroism burns in the very soil. Each of these realms shapes the creatures who dwell in them, and the creatures shape the realms in return. And all through that shaping, threaded like ribbons of silk through open air, are wings. Mount Celestia rises through 7 layers, each one more perfect and luminous than the last. The lowest layer, Lunia, rests beneath a silver sky and is crossed by a sea of holy water that glows from within. Above it, Mercuria burns with a soft golden radiance, its fields endless and its roads made of pressed bronze. Venya is known as the pearly heaven, a layer of rolling softness, full of quiet flowers and streams so clear you can see their beds of polished stone from 50 feet above. Selenia carries the scent of incense that has never quite dissipated, and somewhere in it, bells ring with a sound that reminds you of something you have not thought about in a very long time. Mershin is where holy warriors rest in silver light, where the devotion of centuries settles into the landscape like sunlight into warm stone. Javar, which some call Jovar, is the heaven of gems, where crystal towers rise toward a sky so dense with prismatic light that it feels almost solid. And at the very pinnacle is Cronia's, the illuminated heaven, a layer so perfect and so utterly divine that few mortals can enter it and remain entirely themselves. All 7 layers are alive with celestial beings, and high above each of them, riding the holy thermals of divine air, are birds. The word celestial, in the rules and lore of Dungeons and Dragons, means something precise. A celestial is not simply a creature that is good, not simply a being that makes kind choices in the moment. A celestial is a creature whose fundamental nature is rooted in the positive energy of the upper planes. A being for whom goodness is as ontological as mass is for a stone or wetness is for water. Celestials exist because the cosmos needs them. They perform functions. They maintain balances. They carry messages across the planes. They fight on behalf of the divine in ways that mortals rarely see and almost never fully understand. They guard the borders between goodness and corruption, between the upper planes and the encroaching dark. And they do this not because they were ordered to, but because the act of doing it is inseparable from what they are. When a celestial takes the form of a bird, when it carries its divine nature in hollow bones and feathered wings and eyes that are too clear to look at directly, something happens to the people who see it. There is a response that bypasses rational thought entirely. Not awe exactly, though awe is part of it. Something older than awe. Something that lives in the part of the mortal mind that existed before language, gave the mind tools to explain itself. You see a bird of extraordinary beauty, moving through the air with a purpose that is visible even from a distance, and something in you recognizes it, not because you have been trained to, Because somewhere in the deepest, quietest layers of mortal consciousness, there is a memory of what those wings represent. Messengers from something higher. Evidence that the cosmos is paying attention. The creatures we are going to explore tonight span the full range of what a celestial bird can be. Some of them are serpentine, feathered along every scale, shimmering in colors that change depending on the angle of the light and the feeling in the room. Some of them are humanoid, walking upright on taloned feet, their faces carrying the fierce and particular dignity of hawks at rest. Some of them burn, carrying a fire so divine that it does not simply destroy, but transfigures, turning what it touches into something different and somehow more essential than what it was before. Some of them remember things that happened before the current age of the world was given its name. And some of them carry a grief so old and so quietly settled that it has become almost peaceful, the way a scar becomes peaceful. A mark that no longer hurts, but remains as proof that something happened. Something real and permanent and irreversible. The Kuadil, the feathered serpent, is the being of breathtaking physical beauty and profound lawful goodness, whose origins reach back into the earliest agreements between gods, and whose sacrifices have shaped entire civilizations, without those civilizations ever knowing that a sacrifice was made. The Aarakocra are bird people, humanoids with avian features, and the lightness of creatures built for sky, whose ancestral home is the endless open expanse of the elemental plane of air, but whose deepest loyalty belongs to the celestial realms and the eternal war they are always fighting against elemental darkness. The phoenix is a being of divine fire, a bird that cannot truly die, that burns itself down to the last ash and rises again from that ash with all its memories intact, carrying in its chest the unquenchable warmth of existence itself, the insistence of life on continuing. And then there are the Kenku, the cursed raven folk, who are something entirely different. They are not divine in the same way the others are divine. They are a warning, a story about what happens when those who were given wings choose to betray the hand that gave them, and what remains when everything that made them remarkable is stripped away as punishment. Each of these creatures has a history that extends across editions of the game, across source books and supplements, and adventure modules, and campaign settings built by writers who were encoding philosophy into their creatures, as much as they were building monsters. Some of them appear primarily in the Forgotten Realms, the primary setting of Dungeons and Dragons, that rich, layered world of Faerun and its continents, and its ancient empires folded on top of each other like geological strata. Some of them are equally important in Eberron, the world of Magitech and bound spirits, and old covenants written in sacrifice, where the divine operates through shadow and silence and gestures that take centuries to become legible. and some of them move freely across multiple settings because their nature does not belong to any one world. It belongs to the planes themselves, and the planes exist everywhere the mortal world does not. As we move through this video together, you are going to follow a path. Not a path of battle, not a path of dramatic revelation. Though revelation does come quietly, the way dawn comes. The path you are following is the path of knowing. The kind of knowing that feels like breathing slowly in a very quiet room, where the walls are close enough to feel safe, but the ceiling is high enough that you remember you are not trapped. You are going to learn where these creatures come from, what they want, what they have done, what they have lost, and what they continue to offer to the world, whether or not the world has the clarity to notice. In a world where the gods are real, and the planes are literal geography you can walk to if you have the right magic, birds are never simply birds. A crow landing on your windowsill in a city in Serene might be a kenku watching you for reasons you have not yet guessed. A distant shape circling high above a desert might be a kuadil in its natural form, wrapped in magic that renders it invisible to most forms of detection, moving with quiet purpose toward something it has been working toward for 100 years. An eagle whose wingspan is 30 feet, whose eyes are golden and perfectly, unsettlingly calm, might be a divine messenger carrying a decree from a god to a paladin who does not yet know they are chosen. The sky in this world is not empty. It is full of meaning, full of intent, full of creatures whose existence is a form of sacred communication that the mortal world is always in the process of learning to read, always slightly behind, always catching up to something that has already moved on. These are the vessels of light, the feathered saints and the fallen ones, and the undying fires of the divine. And tonight, one by one, gently and without hurry, we are going to know them. Section 2. The Kuadil Feathered Saints of Creation. The oldest stories about the Kuadil do not begin in a jungle. They do not begin in sunlight, or with the sound of wings moving through warm air. They begin in failure, in the particular kind of failure that is quiet and slow and gradual, the kind that does not announce itself, but simply accumulates, like water pooling in a room that has no drain. Long before the world you know carried the name Abir Toril, before the continents had settled into their familiar shapes, and the great cities of mortals had been built and buried and built again, there existed a race called the Sarok. You may have heard their names spoken carefully in lore about ancient empires, about the days of thunder, about the first civilizations to rise on the material plane. The Sarok were the original serpent folk among the creator races, beings who appeared in the earliest age of the world, when the gods and the material plane were still in the process of agreeing on the rules. They were reptilian, ancient, enormously powerful, and deeply ambitious in the way that only beings who believe they have invented civilization can be ambitious. Their empire, known as Okoth, rose in a time so distant from the present age that the calendar keepers of Serene cannot assign it a year in Dale reckoning, without also assigning that year a minus sign, and a number so large it stops feeling like a number and starts feeling like a philosophical position. For a long time, the Saruk were magnificent. They shaped other races. They built towers of a height that no one has since equaled. They wrote the first laws of magic on materials so durable that fragments of their texts survive even in the current age. But magnificence in that particular mode, the mode of domination and hunger, and the constant reaching for more, carries within it its own kind of rot. And eventually, as the Saruk Empire crumbled and the structures they had built began to falter, the Saruk themselves began to scatter. They left their homelands. They wandered across the plains. And the wandering, slow and without direction, without purpose, hardened them. The darkness that had always been present in the Saruk's approach to the world began to take over. The way cold takes over a room when the fire goes out. Most of the Saruk drifted toward cruelty. It was easier than the alternative. Cruelty is always easier when you are exhausted and afraid, and have no fixed point to return to. But among those wandering clans of displaced serpent folk, there were a few who refused. A small group, perhaps not large even by the standards of their people, who looked at the direction their kin were traveling and felt something that, in a creature with a soul oriented toward goodness, can only be called revulsion. They did not want to become what they saw around them. They did not want the wandering to end in cruelty. So they prayed. The being they prayed to was called Jazirian. You need to hold that name gently for a moment, because Jazirian is not simply a god in the conventional sense. Jazirian is understood by Quattle theologians to be a fragment of something older, something called the world serpent, a being or a concept, or perhaps both at once, whose nature predates the division of existence into lawful and chaotic, good and evil. Jazirian was the fragment of the world serpent that bent toward law and goodness, that believed in peace and community, and the nourishing of wisdom over the accumulation of power. Jazirian appears in the stories as a magnificent rainbow-colored feathered serpent, drifting through the silver skies of Mount Celestia, more radiant than can be described without the description immediately falling short. And Jazirian heard those few frightened, exhausted Saruk, who were begging not for power, but for transformation. The god responded. Those Saruk who had called out were remade, not repaired, not improved, but fundamentally and irrevocably changed, the way a caterpillar is changed by its chrysalis, in a process so complete that what emerges on the other side shares almost nothing with what went in, except continuity of experience. They became the Kuadil, feathered serpents, their scales hidden beneath a covering of feathers that shift through every color of the rainbow as the light changes around them. Wingspans wide enough to carry a creature whose weight you would not expect the air to hold, moving with an effortlessness that seems to quietly deny physics. Eyes of extraordinary clarity, warm and ancient and patient. The kind of eyes that make you feel they have been watching you specifically, carefully, without judgment, for a very long time. The rest of the Sarok did not accept this quietly. They declared war on their transformed former kin. It was the war of the converted against the unconverted, of those who had chosen a different road against those who had decided no road was worth choosing. And the Kuadil were outnumbered, significantly, persistently outnumbered, in the way that the genuinely good so often are when confronted with the genuinely ruthless. But they held their own. The divine energy that Jazirian had woven into their bodies was not decorative. It was functional, alive, and fierce in the service of goodness. Here the lore becomes a matter of some dispute within Quaddle theological tradition itself. Some accounts hold that Jazirian was ultimately slain by Mershak, a darker fragment of the same world serpent, whose nature bent toward chaos and hunger, and the erasure of everything the eternal serpent's lighter half had loved. What we can infer from how the Quaddle speak of Jazirian, with reverence and in present tense rather than elegiac past, is that whatever happened to him, the Kuadil do not simply regard their god as gone. The source books acknowledge this ambiguity directly. Quaddle scholars tend to dismiss the story of Jazirian's death as myth or misinterpretation, pointing out that they still receive visions and omens from their patron as evidence that he endures in some form. Whether this is theological certainty, consolation, or a truth the outer world cannot verify from the outside, the lore does not resolve cleanly. And perhaps that uncertainty is itself part of what it means to follow a god whose nature was always more cosmic than personal. What the lore is clearer on is the aftermath. With the war no longer winnable in any straightforward sense, the Kuadil fled. They poured back through the plains and returned to Abir Toril, landing in the warm jungles and valleys of the distant continent called Mastica. And then something unexpected happened. The people of Mastica looked at these rainbow-feathered serpents drifting through their skies and felt, without being told, that they were in the presence of something holy. A god named Kodal, the feathered serpent deity of Mastica, extended his recognition in return. The Kuadil acknowledged him as something that carried within it the same divine truth Jazirian had embodied, though the exact nature of that connection is left open by the Forgotten Realms sourcebooks. and we can reasonably assume it was theological kinship rather than literal shared origin. They became his favored creatures, his signs in the physical world, evidence of his presence to a people who needed evidence. But not all of them went to Mastika. This is worth pausing on. Some of the Kuadil flew east to the land of Chult, that dense and dangerous peninsula of jungle and ruin. They went there specifically because of the Yuan-Ti, the serpent folk who were themselves the descendants of the Saruk's darkest experiments in reshaping other races, beings who had chosen cruelty and transformation toward something monstrous rather than the transformation toward light that the Kuadil themselves had undergone. The Quattle who went to Chult did so knowing they were entering a war zone on principle, that a creature would voluntarily insert itself into a conflict that was not its current problem, simply because the conflict was wrong and needed addressing, tells you most of what you need to know about the moral character of the Kuadil at its most essential. Their abilities in mechanical terms reflect their nature with unusual precision. A Kuadil can detect evil and good with the precision of a surgeon's instrument. It can read your thoughts, not invasively, not with the brutality of psychic intrusion, but gently, in a way that the source books frame as almost conversational. It can enter your dreams and speak to you there, in the language your sleeping mind understands better than your waking one, offering guidance that you will remember in the morning as something that felt like your own idea. It can become invisible, can shift between planes as easily as you move between rooms, can heal wounds and cure poisons, and bless the endeavors of those it has decided are worth blessing. And it does these things without being asked, without requiring gratitude or temples, or the establishment of a formal religious hierarchy. Now carry that understanding across the ocean of time and the physical ocean both, and let it settle onto a different world entirely. Aberon is not Ferun. The two settings share a rule system and a cosmology, but their mythologies diverge in ways that are as instructive as they are beautiful. In Aberon, the Kuadil were not late arrivals to the world's story. They were there at the very beginning of it. When Kaiba, the underworld of that world, released the first overlords into the age that Aberon's scholars call the Age of Demons, the Kuadil were among the first beings to understand what was at stake. The overlords were not simply dangerous. They were existential, beings so powerful that even the combined might of dragons and celestials, and every mortal army that would ever march, could not destroy them outright, could not unmake them, could only push them back, could only hold them. The Kuadil of Aberon allied with the dragons, two orders of ancient beings standing together against a darkness that neither could face alone. And together, over a war so long it predates all mortal recorded history, by an enormous margin, played out across millions of years of what Abe Iran's scholars call the Age of Demons. They pushed the overlords back. It is worth noting that the discovery and use of the draconic prophecy during this era, that vast lattice of predetermined future events threaded through reality like a river through rock, is attributed in the canon primarily to ancient dragons rather than to the Quattle specifically. The ancient dragon scholar known as Aurelianastrix is one of the figures credited in Eberron canon with first decoding the prophecy's deeper structure. What we can infer, given the Quattle's consistent role as co-combatants and strategic partners in this war, is that they almost certainly contributed to the understanding and application of prophetic knowledge, even if the texts do not name individual Quattle prophets for this contribution. But even reading the prophecy and fighting with everything they had was not enough to end the threat permanently. The overlords were immortal in the most literal sense, and immortal beings cannot be destroyed by any means available in that era. They could only be bound, and binding them would require a source of power so vast, so pure, so absolutely inextinguishable, that even the overlords could not break free of it across any conceivable length of time. The Kuadil made their choice. Almost all of them. Every Kuadil whose essence was strong enough to contribute gathered their immortal souls together. They set aside individuality. They released the separate names and separate memories and separate experiences that had made each of them who they were. They surrendered themselves completely, willingly, without coercion, without a moment of ambiguity about what they were doing. And from that total, voluntary sacrifice, from the joining of all those souls into a single united force, the silver flame was born. The silver flame, that pillar of pure divine fire that burns in Thrain, in the nation at the heart of the Corvair continent, in the great cathedral city where the faithful gather to pray. The silver flame is not a metaphor. It is not a philosophical concept translated into a religious symbol. It is, quite literally, the collective immortal essence of every Kuadil who gave themselves to the binding of the overlords. It is the heat of their sacrifice still burning, still holding, still doing its work in the dark places beneath the world where the overlords sleep in their chains. When the Church of the Silver Flame prays, they pray not to an abstract deity. They pray to the transformed remains of beings who loved this world enough to dissolve themselves for it. And even then, the story did not end with silence. Centuries later, in approximately the year 299, year of the kingdom, a paladin named Tira Mayern followed a single surviving Kuadil into battle against the overlord called Belshazzar, the shadow in the flame, who had worked himself close enough to freedom that the world could feel it. The Kuadil fought. Belshazzar prevailed over the divine serpent, And in its last moment, the Kuadil did not mourn and did not flee. It gave its remaining power to Tira Mayern, the last gift of a being who had nothing left to give except itself. Tira leapt into the chasm, sword first, and the crimson demonic fire that had been building there was transformed, cooled, silvered, made into something that burns not to consume, but to purify. You are looking, then, at a creature whose entire arc through history is an act of generosity so sustained and so complete that it barely resembles sacrifice anymore. It resembles something closer to love. Love in the form that requires the most of you. That asks you not just to do the hard thing once, but to commit to the hard thing across timescales that dissolve the concept of personal cost entirely. The Kuadil loved the world more than they loved their own continued existence. And the world they loved, Aberon, continues to burn with the proof of that. In Faerun, a few still move through the jungles and the warm skies of Mastica and Chult, invisible to most, patient beyond the capacity of any mortal to fully imagine. They watch, they guide, they appear in the dreams of people who are at a crossroads, who are choosing between the easy path and the right one, and they speak in the language of images and warmth. You would not necessarily know one was near you, but there are moments sometimes when you feel certain you are being watched over, when the outcome of a terrible situation turns on a single, perfectly timed event that no one can quite explain. When a stranger says exactly the right thing, and their eyes, for just a moment, seem to hold a light that has nothing to do with the room you are standing in. Those moments might simply be the world being merciful, or they might be a feathered serpent hovering somewhere above you in its invisibility, doing quietly what it has always done, helping without asking to be thanked, protecting without asking to be remembered, giving what it has because giving is, for a Kuadil, not a choice, but the fundamental condition of existing. Section 3. The Kenku, when heaven loses its wings. Not every story about a winged being is a story about divinity. Some of the most important ones are stories about what happens when those gifts are taken away, about what is left when the sky you were born to inhabit has been permanently closed off, when the only proof that you were ever something more is a hollow ache in your shoulders where your wings used to be. The Kenku carry that ache everywhere they go. If you have met a Kenku in the course of your adventures, you may have thought of them as unsettling. A humanoid figure with the head of a crow or raven, glossy black feathers covering their body, fingers ending in curved dark nails, eyes carrying that quality that corvid eyes always carry, the sense that they are computing something about you more quickly than you are computing anything about them. And when they speak to you, they do not speak. Not exactly. What you hear instead is a collage, a sentence assembled from sounds they have collected, a word in one voice, a phrase in another, a tone borrowed from someone who spoke it in a different room on a different day and never knew they were being recorded. You can understand them, but the experience of being understood by them feels different, tilted, like looking at a reflection in water that is just slightly disturbed. What you are encountering in those moments is the living residue of a punishment so old it predates the current age of the world. The Kenku were not always this way. That is the sentence that carries the most weight in all of their lore. The sentence from which everything else radiates outward. The Kenku were not always flightless. They were not always limited to the voices of others. They were not always creatures who could only copy what they had heard, who could not invent a single image or melody or turn of phrase that did not originate somewhere else first. There was a time before the punishment, a time when the Kenku possessed three of the most magnificent gifts imaginable and served a master of tremendous power. Here is where the lore requires careful handling, because Volo's Guide to Monsters, the 5th edition sourcebook that gives the Kenku their most detailed canonical treatment, is deliberately restrained about naming the master directly. The text describes a being of great power who had a private realm, who possessed secrets worth coveting and treasures worth risking everything to steal. The identity of this master is not confirmed in the text. What the framing of the Kenku story strongly implies, given that the master's domain is never described as celestial, that the gifts given to the Kenku are described as practical tools of service rather than divine blessings, and that the tone of the whole account carries the texture of servitude rather than sacred calling, is that this was not a being of the upper planes. The nature of the master reads more like a powerful patron of ambiguous or darker alignment, one who kept the Kenku as prized servants rather than elevated companions. Some scholars of the lore have suggested, based on elements of the description, that the master may have been a demon lord. This remains interpretive rather than confirmed, but it fits the evidence as it stands. What we can say with confidence is that the Kenku's origin story is not a story about falling from grace in the celestial sense. It is a story about betraying a powerful patron and losing everything as a consequence. The first gift given to the Kenku was flight. Strong, capable wings that allowed them to move with genuine freedom, to rise above the ground-level concerns of most creatures, and operate in the vertical dimension that so much of the mortal world ignores. These were not metaphorical wings. They were functional, physical, and constituted the Kenku's most fundamental advantage as servants. They could go where others could not. They could arrive quickly and depart just as quickly. They could observe from positions that ground-bound beings could never reach. The second gift was voice. The Kenku's original voice, before the curse, was said to be something remarkable. Not simply pleasant, but specifically expressive. Capable of articulating things with a precision that went beyond ordinary language, conveying not just meaning, but texture and feeling and context all at once. A Kenku speaking in its true voice could tell you something and have you understand not just what was said, but why it mattered, what it felt like to know it. Based on how the source books describe it, this voice was a tool of extraordinary communication. Perhaps one of the reasons the Kenku were valued as servants in the first place. A being who could convey complex information with perfect clarity, who could negotiate and persuade and describe, would be enormously useful to any master with broad and complicated interests. The third gift was imagination, true creativity, the ability to conceive of things that did not yet exist, to originate rather than simply replicate. This gift, in the full cosmological picture of Dungeons and Dragons, is rarer than it might initially seem. Many beings can copy. Many beings can extrapolate, can take a pattern and extend it. But the ability to originate, to be the first point of a new line rather than simply a point along an existing one, this was something the Kenku had been given, and which, when combined with their flight and their voice, made them among the most capable servants any powerful being could ask for. 3 gifts, each one complementing and amplifying the other 2. And the Kenku, in the end, decided that serving was not enough. Volo's Guide to Monsters describes the Kenku conspiring to steal something from their master. A treasure, something described as sparkling. Something the Kenku wanted badly enough to risk their entire existence for it. The specifics of what the treasure was, or why the Kenku wanted it so desperately, are left open by the sourcebook. And we can reasonably infer that this vagueness is intentional. The exact object matters less than the act. What matters is that the Kenku looked at something their master possessed, decided it should belong to them, and reached for it with a hunger they could not discipline. Whether this hunger was encouraged by outside influence, whether some darker power pointed the Kenku toward the treasure, and whispered that taking it was only taking what they deserved, the text does not say. What it is clear on is the outcome. They were caught, and the master took from them the 3 things they had been given. In a symmetry so precise, it feels almost like a philosophical argument rendered as punishment. The wings went first, not torn away violently, not amputated in a moment of rage, but simply revoked, as if the wings had always been on loan, and the loan had now been called back. The Kenku who had been flyers became grounded overnight. They still carry the underlying architecture, the hollow bones in their arms and across their shoulders. The physical memory of what flight felt like encoded in the structure of their skeletons. But the wings themselves are gone. All that remains is the knowledge that they once existed, and the very specific, very precise awareness of their absence. The voice went second. The Kenku's original expressive speech was removed entirely, replaced with a silence that is permanent and unbreakable, except for one narrow exception. The Kenku can still make sounds. They can reproduce, with absolute fidelity, any sound they have ever heard. A human voice, a thunderclap, the particular creak of a specific door in a specific house, the exact tempo and pitch of a conversation held 3 rooms away and 2 years ago. The mimicry is perfect. There is no distortion, no interpretation, no editorial layering added by the Kenku's own personality. What you hear when a Kenku speaks to you is a sound that existed elsewhere first, reproduced with the precision of a recording. And in that precision is both the ghost of their former gift and the cruelest possible illustration of what was taken from it. They can carry the voices of others forever. They cannot speak in their own voice at all. The imagination went last, and this may be the deepest wound of the 3. The Kenku lost the ability to originate. They can learn. They can refine. They can execute complex plans with extraordinary skill, can master techniques and disciplines, can become among the most capable thieves, assassins, and information brokers in the mortal world, because their observational capacity is undiminished, and their ability to replicate what they observe is unmatched. But they cannot conceive of something genuinely new. They cannot dream up a solution that has no precedent. They cannot write a song that was not, in some essential structural sense, assembled from pieces of songs already written by others. They are, as Volo's Guide to Monsters states directly, trapped in a world of imitation, unable to see any way forward that was not mapped first by someone else. The Kenku fell to the mortal world, and the mortal world has been their home ever since. They are drawn to cities, to the density and variety of human settlements, the way ravens are drawn to places where things are dropped and lost. They thrive in urban environments because urban environments are full of sounds and information, full of the raw material their mimicry requires. They gather in small communities, often in the lower districts, often in places where the city's attention does not reach very frequently. They are almost universally regarded with suspicion. This is both fair and deeply unfair at once. It is fair because the Kenku's history of betrayal has never quite left them, because the hunger that got them cursed has not entirely disappeared, because their natural talents for observation and silent movement and perfect reproduction of other people's voices make them superb at dishonest work. It is unfair because none of the individual Kenku walking the streets of Waterdeep or Baldur's Gate chose any of this. They were born into a curse that was decreed before their grandparents' grandparents were alive. They carry a punishment that belongs to their entire history, not to their individual choices. Now, you might ask why the Kenku appear in a video about celestial birds. The answer is that their presence here is not incidental. Among all the winged beings we are exploring, the Kenku are the ones who illuminate what the others are by showing us what they are not. Every other creature in this video either is divine or has chosen to align itself with the divine. The Kuadil were transformed by a god of law and goodness. The Aarakocra orient their entire culture around the upper planes. The phoenix is made of the same positive energy that the celestial planes are built from. The Kenku had something very different. They had gifts given by a patron whose nature the Lord deliberately leaves in shadow. Gifts practical and powerful and valuable. And they betrayed the giver of those gifts out of wanting more than they were given. They are the shape of what happens when you hold a great gift and find it insufficient. They are the cautionary verse in a hymn whose other lines are all praise. There is something about the Kenku's situation. When you sit with it long enough, that becomes genuinely moving rather than simply tragic. Because they remember, not the specific memories of flying or speaking in a voice that was fully their own, but the shape of it, the dimension of it. The Kenku know, with a bone-deep certainty, that they cannot articulate because articulation requires a voice they no longer have. That their current existence is a smaller version of something that was once larger, more free, more fully itself. They yearn for a sky they cannot reach. Describe the feeling of flight to each other using borrowed voices and collected sounds in assemblages that approach poetry without ever quite becoming it. This is one of the most important things to understand about Kenku communication. When a Kenku assembles a response to you from fragments of overheard speech, they are not simply fishing for whatever sounds carry the right meaning. They are curating. They are making choices about which voice, which tone, which specific instance of a word captures most precisely what they are trying to say. There is artistry in it, even if the artistry is constrained by the rule that no element of it can be original. And in that constrained artistry, in that reaching for expression within a system that refuses to give them the tools that expression truly requires, there is something that looks very much like the ghost of the third gift. Not fully, not freely, but a shadow of the instinct that knows what creativity should feel like, even without the means to achieve it completely. Some who study the Kenku have observed that their punishment mirrors their crime with an almost instructive precision. They wanted something their master held, and decided that wanting it was sufficient justification for taking it. In response, they were made incapable of originating anything, while simultaneously being given a perfect archive of everything they had ever heard. A vast memory of the world's voices, with no ability to add a voice of their own to it. They have everything except the one thing they reached for, and the reaching is what cost them everything they had. In the broadest sweep of this video's subject, the Kenku occupy a specific and irreplaceable position. They are the inverted outline, the creature-shaped space where something winged and capable used to be, which still carries the memory of flight in its bones and the outline of wings in its silhouette, but which must now do the work of existing in a world it was not designed for, carrying a grief it was not given the language to name. And still they endure. They build their communities in the middle of cities that regard them with suspicion. They develop their skills to extraordinary levels. They communicate with each other in a private vocabulary of borrowed sounds that outsiders cannot parse, but that carries, between the Kenku themselves, nuances of meaning that took generations to develop. They tell their young the story of what was lost, not in words that belong to them, but in sounds and gestures, and the careful repetition of certain fragments arranged in a sequence that every Kenku recognizes as the oldest story they know. The story of the wings, the story of the voice, the story of the moment before the punishment, when the Kenku still had all three gifts and had not yet made the choice that would cost them everything. And sometimes, very rarely, a Kenku will stop in the middle of a street, in the middle of a city, and tilt their head back and look up at the sky with those dark, ancient, corvid eyes, and stay that way for a long moment, not moving, not making any sound at all, just looking up. Section 4. The Aarakocra, Children of the Eternal Sky, where the Kenku look up at the sky from below. The Aarakocra look down at the earth from above, and what they feel when they do is something very close to discomfort. Not hostility toward the ground exactly, not fear of it the way a creature of deep water might fear open air. Something quieter and more personal than that. The earth for an Aarakocra is the place you go when something has gone wrong, when you have lost altitude, when you have been brought low by circumstance or injury, or the particular cruelty of a world that does not always accommodate those who were built for open space. The ground is where the Aarakocra wait to be well enough to fly again. Their home is not a world. It is not a continent or a mountain range or a river valley. Their home is a direction. Up. The elemental plane of air is one of the 4 classic elemental planes that occupy the inner ring of the great wheel cosmology, a vast and borderless expanse of moving atmosphere, of wind currents and cloud formations, and open distances so immense they are difficult to hold in the mortal mind, without that mind beginning to feel slightly unmoored. There is no ground on the elemental plane of air. There are islands, enormous floating masses of rock and crystal, and compressed cloud that drift on the great wind currents. And these serve as the closest thing the plane has to a landscape. But between them is only sky, infinite in every direction, without a horizon, because a horizon requires two distinct things to meet, and here there is only one. Wind, air, the endless, breathing, moving body of atmosphere that is one of the four primal substances from which all physical reality is assembled. The Aarakocra were born into this environment and shaped by it entirely. They are humanoid in the way that a hawk might be humanoid if you stood it upright and gave it arms and hands, which is to say they are humanoid in the structural sense, while remaining, in every detail that actually matters, something that belongs to the sky. Their bodies are slight, hollow-boned, built for weight reduction rather than ground-level durability. Their arms extend naturally into wings when spread, the feathers beginning at the wrist and sweeping outward in a span that carries them through the air at speeds that ground-bound travelers spend their whole lives wishing they could match. Their feet are taloned and strong, designed for grasping and perching rather than walking, which gives them a slightly halting quality when they move on ground that reads correctly as the movement of a creature operating outside its native context. Their faces are avian, beaked, with large forward-facing eyes that process movement and distance with an acuity that no ground-dwelling humanoid can match. An Aarakocra in flight can spot a target from heights that would make that same target invisible to human eyes entirely. But the physical description, as always, is the least interesting part. The Aarakocra are not simply bird people who live in the sky. They are agents. They have a purpose that extends beyond their own survival or the continuation of their culture. The Aarakocra exist, in the deepest sense of the word, in relationship to something, to a duty they did not invent and did not choose by individual decision, but were born into the way you are born into the culture and language of your people, absorbing it so early and so completely that it becomes indistinguishable from your own instinct. That duty is the defense of the upper planes against elemental evil. The elder elemental eye and the ancient powers of elemental chaos that serve it, forces that seek to unmake the structure of the cosmos and reduce it back to primal, undifferentiated matter, have been the Aarakocra's ancestral enemy since before recorded time. The conflict is not metaphorical. It is a real and ongoing war, fought across the elemental planes, and occasionally the material plane as well. Whenever a crack opens between the worlds, and something from the elemental chaos seeps through, the Aarakocra are in the framework that the elemental evil player's companion establishes for them. Among Mount Celestia's most dedicated sentinels, they are an early warning system, a rapid response force. When elemental evil moves, the Aarakocra are often the first to know, and often the first to act. This relationship with Mount Celestia is one of the defining facts of Aarakocra existence, and one of the most important things to understand about their culture. The Aarakocra are not native to the celestial planes. Their origin is the elemental plane of air, but they are aligned with the upper planes in a way that goes beyond mere alliance, beyond treaty or agreement or mutual interest. Mount Celestia, with its 7 layers of ascending perfection and its luminous silver sea at the base, functions as the Aarakocra's theological center of gravity. It is the still point around which their cosmological understanding revolves, the destination that gives their long vigil over the elemental planes its ultimate frame of meaning. They are not fighting darkness simply to protect themselves. They are fighting it in service of something higher, something that they look toward the way the very devout look toward the place their God is said to dwell. Their gods reflect this orientation. Serenita, the Aarakocra's own patron deity, is a goddess of watchfulness and protection, a divine embodiment of the Aarakocra's highest aspiration: to see everything, to miss nothing, to be so perfectly positioned above the world that no threat can move beneath your notice without you knowing. The Forgotten Realms sourcebooks confirm Serenita as the Aarakocra's specific patron, a deity whose domain maps onto the bird people's deepest values with a precision that suggests the deity. And the people shaped each other across a very long shared history. Beyond Serenita, many Aarakocra communities also feel a deep kinship with Airdrie, the elven goddess of sky and weather and freedom, whose domain is their domain, and whose nature, wild and unbound and perpetually in motion, reflects something they recognize in themselves, even across the difference of origin. The spiritual practice of the Aarakocra is inseparable from the act of flying. This is not metaphor or poetic elevation of a mundane activity. The Aarakocra genuinely regard flight as a form of prayer, as participation in a devotional act as real, and as efficacious as any ritual conducted in a temple on the ground. Their meditations happen in the air. Their important conversations happen in the air. The ceremonies that mark the passages of their lives, from hatching through the coming of age to the preparation for death, all happen in the air if it is at all possible. To perform a sacred act on the ground is considered a necessary compromise at best, and a genuinely unfortunate circumstance at worst. Based on how the sourcebooks describe the Aarakocra's relationship to altitude and spiritual expression, it seems reasonable to infer that a grounded ceremony feels to them something like a song performed at the wrong pitch. Present, recognizable, but missing the quality that makes it complete. The organization of Aarakocra communities tends toward the loose and horizontal, rather than the rigid and hierarchical. Leadership exists, but it is earned through demonstrated wisdom and skill in navigation and aerial awareness, rather than through birthright or the accumulation of material wealth. An elder who can read the wind currents of the elemental plane of air and predict a storm system 3 days before it arrives, who can identify elemental disturbance from a height of several thousand feet, who can mediate a dispute between flock members with the clarity of someone who has been watching problems from above long enough to see their shape whole. This is the kind of elder the Aarakocra follow. A leader who cannot fly, who is grounded by age or injury, will typically pass their authority to a younger member, rather than allow the community's need for aerial leadership to go unmet. This meritocratic, flight-based social structure produces a particular kind of cultural tension when Aarakocra interact with ground-dwelling civilizations. The Aarakocra regard most surface-dwelling peoples with a mixture of genuine affection and something that, if expressed honestly, would come across as mild, persistent bewilderment. Why do they stay down there? Why do they build their homes on the ground when the ground is the most vulnerable possible position, the place farthest from the celestial realms and closest to whatever darkness lurks beneath the surface? The Aarakocra are not arrogant about this in the way that implies contempt. They simply do not fully understand the attachment to groundedness that defines most mortal cultures. And this is one of the most fundamental ways in which the Aarakocra experience of reality diverges from the experience of those around them. In the Forgotten Realms, Aarakocra communities exist primarily in high mountain ranges, in the spine of the world and the star mounts, and the elevated ridges of the western heartlands, places where the altitude gives them enough distance from the lowlands to feel something like home. They are not common in cities and lowland settlements. When an Aarakocra appears in a city, it is almost always because something has drawn them down from the heights for a specific reason. A mission, an emergency, a piece of information that needed to be delivered in person. They do not linger. The streets are too narrow, the sky too fragmented by rooftops and towers, the air too still and too full of smoke and the sounds of crowds. An Aarakocra in a city is a creature filling its time with purposeful action, because purpose is the only substitute for altitude. The 5th edition sourcebooks bring the Aarakocra into direct and prominent contact with the storyline of elemental evil in the Forgotten Realms, specifically through the Princes of the Apocalypse adventure, and its connection to the Elder Elemental Eyes cults operating in the Somber Hills region. The Aarakocra in that context are sentinels who were drawn to the region because they detected, from their high vantage points, the particular wrongness of elemental corruption spreading through the landscape below. They have been watching with increasing concern for months before the player characters arrive. They understand something is deeply wrong. What they need, because the nature of the threat requires action at ground level, in tunnels and underground temples that no flying creature can effectively patrol alone, is someone who can go where they cannot. In this way, the adventure uses the Aarakocra's celestial role with thematic precision. The watchers from above must ask the walkers below to do the part of the work that height cannot accomplish. Their abilities in mechanical terms reflect their nature with unusual accuracy. Aarakocra player characters, as established in the elemental evil player's companion, possess a flying speed of 50 feet, among the highest of any playable ancestry in the game. They can attack with their taloned feet as a bonus action while airborne, a natural weapon that requires no equipment and no training beyond the instincts built into their bodies from hatching. And from the Monster Manual's non-player character version, 5 or more Aarakocra performing a specific ritual together can summon an air elemental, calling a being of pure atmospheric energy into physical form. This ability is worth sitting with because of what it implies about the Aarakocra's relationship to the plane they come from. The air elemental they summon is not a servant in the way. A conjured beast is a servant. It is something closer to a relative, a manifestation of the same primordial substance that shaped the elemental plane of air, and by extension shaped the Aarakocra themselves. The ritual is framed in the source books as something the Aarakocra perform with reverence, and we can reasonably take that to mean the summoning is understood as reunion rather than domination. There is something worth noting about Aarakocra names, because the names are themselves a fragment of culture that carries meaning. Aarakocra names are built from sounds that evoke wind and movement. Sharp sounds for sudden directional changes. Long open sounds for sustained flight. A sequence of phonemes that, when spoken aloud by an Aarakocra, has a rhythm that feels almost like the rhythm of wing beats, rising and catching a thermal and leveling out into a long, effortless glide. Hearing an Aarakocra's full name spoken in its native cadence is, by many accounts, an unexpectedly affecting experience. Not beautiful in the conventional sense of something crafted for beauty, but true in a very specific way. A sound that matches exactly what made the sound. The Aarakocra are not a simple archetype. They are not the straightforward bird warrior that a surface reading might suggest. They carry, in their relationship to the sky and to the celestial realms, and to the unending war they were born into, a complexity that rewards attention. They are beings for whom freedom and duty are not opposites and never have been. For an Aarakocra, freedom is the sky, and the sky is also where they do their most important work, where they fight the enemies of the upper planes, where they watch the world for signs of the darkness that is always somewhere trying to rise. The ability to soar without limit, and the obligation to use that ability in the service of something larger than themselves are not in tension for the Aarakocra. They are the same thing, arrived at from two directions and meeting in the middle. This is what makes the Aarakocra such a quietly perfect expression of what a celestial aligned bird can mean in the cosmology of Dungeons and Dragons. They did not begin in the upper planes. They were not created by a god specifically to serve divine ends. They are an elemental people who chose, collectively, and at the deepest level of their cultural identity, to align themselves with goodness, to take the freedom the sky gave them and spend it on protection, to use the height their wings gave them not to escape the world's troubles, but to see them more clearly and respond to them more swiftly. There is a generosity in that which is all the more meaningful for being a choice, and for being a choice that each new generation of Aarakocra makes again, inheriting the commitment and renewing it, one wing beat at a time. And they did it by going up, which was the only direction that had ever felt to them like going home. Section 5, the Phoenix and the Undying Chorus. There is a fire that does not care whether you call it holy. It does not need the word. It burns at a temperature that philosophy cannot quite reach, in a register older than the question of whether something that burns is good or evil, or somewhere in between. You have spent this entire video moving through beings whose wings carry intention, whose flight is a declaration of alignment. The Kuadil and their lawful goodness woven into every scale. The Aarakocra and their chosen orientation toward the upper planes. The Kenku and the cautionary weight of what they lost. Now we arrive at something different, something that reminds you that the cosmos is larger than even the most expansive moral framework, something that was burning long before any framework was built to describe it. The Phoenix, and the first thing you need to know about it, the thing that separates the truth of its lore from the shape of it that most people carry in their imagination, is that the Phoenix in Dungeons and Dragons is not a celestial in the technical sense. It is not a being of the upper planes. It does not serve a good-aligned god, or carry the banner of divine law or compassion into battle. In Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, the canonical 5th edition sourcebook, where the Phoenix receives its fullest mechanical and narrative treatment, it is classified as an elemental creature, true neutral in alignment, a force of nature given form, not a messenger of heaven. This distinction matters, and sitting with it makes the phoenix more interesting rather than less. What this means in practice is that the phoenix belongs to the category of things so fundamental to the structure of physical reality that moral orientation, the question of what side it is on, does not apply to it the way it applies to beings who were shaped by intention. The phoenix is to fire what a hurricane is to wind. It does not destroy because it is evil, and it does not spare because it is good. It burns because burning is what it is, and it returns because returning is the other half of what it is. And the cycle between those two states is not a story about virtue or corruption. It is a story about the nature of fire itself, about what fire actually is when you follow it all the way to its cosmological source. A phoenix is enormous, larger than most creatures that share the sky with it. Their wingspan in the source books is given as roughly 20 feet, and their body, sheathed entirely in flames that shift from deep amber at the base through brilliant gold to a white blue at the outermost edges, moves through the air with a grace that their size makes almost impossible to credit. Their eyes are burning wells of primal intelligence, not the warm and patient intelligence of the Kuadil, not the watchful and purposeful intelligence of the Aarakocra, but something older and less personal than either. The intelligence of something that has existed longer than the concept of a named individual, that processes the world on a timescale no mortal mind can hold. They make their homes in volcanic regions, in places where the earth itself is already expressing something of the same quality the phoenix carries. Mountainous fire zones, volcanic plains, the deep places where magma is close enough to the surface that the ground is warm underfoot. They are not simply residents of these places. They are, in a real cosmological sense, of a piece with them. A phoenix living near a volcano is not a creature that has chosen a convenient habitat. It is a being that has returned to a kind of resonance, a correspondence between its inner nature and its outer geography that makes the volcanic landscape feel less like a home and more like a reflection. When a phoenix dies, and here is the part that the myth has always understood, even when the details shifted across retellings, it burns down completely. The fire that is its body intensifies in the final moments, burning hotter and more brilliantly than at any other point in its existence, until the bird is entirely consumed by its own inner light. What remains is ash, and at the center of that ash, a warmth that does not dissipate. The Tome of Foes describes this process with the matter-of-fact clarity appropriate to a natural phenomenon rather than a divine event. The phoenix is not performing a miracle when it returns. It is completing a cycle, the same way a tide completes a cycle, the same way a season does. There is no supernatural intervention required. The fire simply reconstitutes itself, drawing the ash back into a new body. The new body identical to the old one in every functional way, carrying within it the full continuity of the creature's experience. This is where the phoenix diverges most sharply from a simple metaphor about hope or resurrection. In many fantasy traditions, a phoenix's rebirth is a gift, a grace extended to a worthy creature by a benevolent cosmos. In Dungeons and Dragons, it is something more elemental and in some ways more profound. The phoenix returns because fire, at the cosmological level, does not end. It transforms. What looks like destruction is, at the deeper level, a transition between states. The ash is not what is left after the fire. The ash is the fire in a different phase, holding the potential of the next fire, the way a seed holds the potential of the next tree. The phoenix's immortality is not the immortality of a preserved soul or a protected life. It is the immortality of a process, of a natural law made into a creature. In the broader sweep of what this means for encounters and stories in the game, the phoenix's true neutral nature creates possibilities that a good-aligned divine creature cannot offer in the same way. A good-aligned celestial is approachable. You can appeal to its values. You can ask for its help on the basis of shared moral orientation. The phoenix does not work this way. It does not care about your cause, not because it is hostile to you, but because it operates in a register that your cause does not reach. Characters who seek out a phoenix in the source books are typically doing so not for its blessing or its guidance, but for something it carries. The ash from a phoenix's previous death, still warm and faintly luminous, has properties that no other substance in the known planes can replicate. A single vial of phoenix ash can be used to restore life, to cure conditions that resist all other treatment, to reignite magical fires that have gone out for reasons that seem permanent. These are not gifts the phoenix gives. They are byproducts of what it is, the same way a river deposits sediment without meaning to. The phoenix does not offer these things. The phoenix simply is what it is, and what it is has uses that those who know enough about the cosmos can find and apply. Now, while the phoenix occupies one end of the avian spectrum in this lore, carrying in it something vast and impersonal and older than intention, the giant eagle holds the opposite end with a quiet and grounded dignity that is entirely its own. And here the lore has recently clarified something important. The 2024 revision of the Monster Manual, the most current canonical iteration of 5th edition, formally reclassifies giant eagles alongside giant owls as celestial creatures, with the notation that they have roots in Mount Celestia and the Beastlands. This is not an arbitrary mechanical decision. It reflects a long-standing undercurrent in the earlier editions of the game, where giant eagles were consistently associated with the upper planes, and with good-aligned divine entities, used as mounts by powerful celestials, and treated by many cultures of Serene as portents of sacred significance when they appeared near inhabited places. What makes this reclassification meaningful is that it confirms something players and dungeon masters had long intuited from the way giant eagles behave in the lore. These are not simply large animals. They are creatures with genuine intelligence, capable of speech in both common and Oran, the language of the air and wind. They form bonds of loyalty with those they choose to trust that are described in the source books as deep and lasting. The kind of loyalty that is chosen rather than instinctual, that requires the eagle to assess you and conclude that you are worth committing to. They do not enter these bonds easily and do not abandon them without cause. And the specific quality of their presence near a location, the sense that something important is happening in a place where a giant eagle is watching, is not merely cultural superstition in the game world. It is, with the current canonical framing, an accurate perception. When a giant eagle is watching, the Beastlands and perhaps Mount Celestia itself have an eye on that place. In the Beastlands, which is the upper plane where the natural world reaches its most sacred and spiritually realized form, the eagle holds a particular position. The plane is one where animals exist not as diminished or simplified versions of their ideal type, but as the most complete expression of what their type is, what their type means, what the fact of their existence says about the deeper structure of a world that made them. An eagle in the Beastlands hunts not for survival alone, but as an expression of its full nature, with the precision and clarity of a being that has no gap between what it is and what it does. Watching it from a distance, you would understand, without needing it explained, why eagles have always been symbols of vision and decision and the courage of altitude. The simurgh deserves mention here, though carefully, and with the acknowledgement that its canonical standing in Dungeons and Dragons has always been anchored more firmly in older editions than in the current era. In the original Advanced Dungeons and Dragons materials, the simurgh appeared as a lawful good creature of enormous size and power, a being sometimes called the King of the Birds, with a wingspan of 20 feet, 4 wings of razor-edged metallic feathers, a golden tail capable of hypnotizing those who looked at it directly, and a nature that was described as peaceful, protective, and deeply helpful to good-aligned beings. It could cast powerful magic, carried an innate glow of continual light, and was said to have been watching the world for so long that it had observed every significant event in mortal history from a position of perfect altitude. A single feather from its tail could power magical items and write scrolls of prismatic magic that no other material could inscribe. The simurgh, as presented in those early materials, is a being of extraordinary celestial gravitas. a creature whose age and observation give it a perspective on mortal affairs, so complete that encountering one was understood as a rare and transformative event. Based on what we know of how the AD and D sources treated the Simurgh, and how later fan-driven adaptations have continued to engage with it as a gargantuan celestial with divine characteristics, it seems reasonable to suggest that the Simurgh represents a strand of the celestial bird tradition that the game has not fully developed in its current edition, but has never entirely released. It sits in the lore like something waiting to be returned to. A figure so inherently compelling in its combination of size and age and lawful goodness, that its absence from the current canonical creature roster feels like a space rather than a conclusion. What you have now, holding all of these creatures together in one complete picture, is a portrait of what the cosmos of Dungeons and Dragons does with the idea of birds. It takes that idea, which every human culture has used as a symbol of the sky and of freedom, and of the distance between mortals and the divine, and it builds it out into a full spectrum of philosophical statements. The Kuadil say that goodness is worth absolute sacrifice, that love for a world can run deep enough to dissolve the self entirely and give what remains to the work of protection. The Aarakocra say that freedom and duty, properly understood, are not opposites, but expressions of the same commitment seen from two different angles. The Kenku say, in their painful and permanent way, that betrayal of trust has a shape and a weight that is carried for generations, that what you reach for in hunger can cost you everything you already had. The Phoenix says something that underlies all the others, something so deep it barely needs saying, which is that cycles do not end. That fire comes back. That ending is a phase, not a conclusion. And the giant eagle, quiet and present, and watching from a height that keeps it just above the moment, says simply, something is paying attention. The cosmos has eyes. They are golden and calm, and they have been on this place for longer than you have been here. All of these creatures, across every edition of the game they have appeared in, across every source book and adventure, and campaign setting and supplement that has added to their lore, share a quality that is easier to feel than to define. They make the sky mean something. In a game where the sky is often simply the ceiling of the encounter space, the space above the dungeon you are descending into, the background against which dramatic events are framed, these creatures insist that the sky is not background. It is foreground. It is populated. It is the part of the world where the questions you have not yet thought to ask are already being answered by beings who have been working on them for longer than your civilization has had a name. Until next time, may the sky above you always mean something.